Can I just reiterate what other speakers have said before me, and thank Shelter for asking me to come along today to speak to you about one of the government mortgage rescue schemes. Before I start, folks, I know I'm conscious that I'm standing here between you and lunch, which is never a good position to be in. And probably a good presentation is very similar to a good speech. You've got to have a good middle, a good start, a good middle, and a good end. But I think more importantly, they've all got to be as close together as possible. I'll try and do that. I can't guarantee it's going to be good, but I will try and keep it to the 20 minutes. The Homeowner Support Fund, just to explain really what that is, it was first announced in June 2008 by the Deputy First Minister in Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon. Following an independent evaluation of the existing mortgage to rent scheme, the revised mortgage to rent scheme and new mortgage to shared equity scheme was introduced in March 2009. In simple terms, the Homeowner Support Fund is the overarching budget which funds both the mortgage to rent and mortgage to shared equity schemes. Funding for these schemes over the past 2 years has been £35 million, and I'm pleased to say that in 2010-11 the Scottish Government committed a further £20 million to fund both of these schemes. Mortgage to rent, the aim of the scheme remains the same today as it did when it was first introduced in 2003, and it is exactly as it says in the slide. Under the mortgage to rent scheme, we, the Scottish Government, can arrange for a social landlord such as a housing association or a local authority to buy a home and for the owner to continue to live there as a tenant of that landlord. The new mortgage to shared equity scheme, which is less familiar to people who find themselves in arrears, is that the Scottish Government may be able to take an equity stake in somebody's home. The owner will still continue to have 100% ownership of the property and will have responsibility for ensuring and maintaining it. But by taking that equity stake, we hope to be able to reduce the amount of borrowing to secured lenders so that it's affordable for them and they can continue to live in their home. Background to mortgage to rent. There's a slide that I haven't included here. For those of you who don't know what it is or where it evolved from, back in 2003, it was part of the then Scottish Executive's commitment to look at something through the Mortgage Rights Bill to provide assistance for people who were struggling. And really the main beneficiaries for the schemes are the homeowners themselves, and because in most cases the debts are repaid, the pressure is eased on the homeowner, homelessness is avoided, household remains in the same property and can maintain the links that they've established in the local area, kids at local school, and if they're employed locally, so there's no need to uproot them. For landlords, the main benefit for landlords is that they get a subsidy from the government to buy a property and add it to their stock to enable a social rent to be charged. There's a repair subsidy as well as a purchase subsidy, which is capped at £6,000 for any necessary repairs to bring the property up to the Scottish housing quality standard. That property becomes an asset of the landlord that they can either re-let at a later date or sell on and realise any profit from the sale, the only condition being the government will have to get back the original subsidy that it put in. And the property is added, as I said, to their stock, and there's a new Scottish secure tenancy created and somebody is added to the social rented sector. For lenders and trustees, if trustees are involved, but mainly for lenders, in most cases the secured debts are repaid through the value that it's sold for through the mortgage to rent scheme. Where there's a shortfall situation, what we ensure is that there's an agreement reached between the lender and the owner to repay that shortfall, albeit it will be on an unsecured basis. The property is sold without the need for repossession, so there's less cost to the lender or the trustee, and there's less hassle. And through this mortgage to rent sale, as I've said, it means that the property will be sold at the open market value and not be auctioned off, which would leave less money available to lenders and trustees and perhaps create a larger shortfall for the tenant or for the borrower. Both schemes, through the operation, are certainly complemented by other UK schemes that are available, and the new Homeowner and Debtor Protection Act, which hopefully will come into force later in the year. But through the evaluation, what we certainly found was that people were finding themselves in extremely complex debt situations. So it was decided that anybody who was applying to the scheme for assistance, first of all, before they do, they have to get trained money advice, or advice from a trained money advisor. The money advisor has to be certainly trained, must be independent, and the advice must be free. That was a recognition of the evaluation that took place of the scheme, because applicants have to be able to consider a whole range of options that are available to them before making an informed choice. The Scottish Government scheme won't help everybody, and it's not designed to help everybody, but there are other things that people can and should be considering. In the past, to be eligible to apply for the scheme, legal action had to be underway, and very often people have got to the situation where eviction dates have been set and left little time for them or the government to come up with a suitable solution for them. So when the schemes were introduced in 2009, we said that we would accept applications much earlier in the process. The 3 months, as it says in the slide there, if people are 3 months in arrears, we can accept their application, provided certain other things happen, and I'll explain some of those. Whilst we will accept applications much earlier in the process than we did before, we are now forcing people to speak to their lenders to discuss with them their arrears situation, because whilst we want to avoid people losing their homes, we also want them to consider alternative arrangements to manage their debt, and the important people in the equation are the borrowers and the lenders themselves. In addition, they must be able to demonstrate that these discussions have taken place and that they've been unable to renegotiate their terms or restructure their payment proposals. If they can't get this in writing from their lender, then a covering letter from the money advisor will suffice as far as the application goes, to say that they have been in discussions and they weren't able to come to some sort of arrangement or agreement. Also, the capital limits have changed at the application stage, because basically we want to get better value for public money, and if people have more than £2,000 or £4,000 depending on their age, then we expect them to use this sort of savings to help themselves out the debt situation before public funds are used. The capital limits at the end of the process have remained the same, so somebody, depending on their age, may be able to keep £8,000 or £12,000 if that is available from the sale. As I said, before somebody can apply for assistance under the Homeowner Support Fund, by getting the advice that's appropriate, they have to look at other forms of assistance and apply for it if they're entitled to do so. And these are specifically income support, mortgage interest payment relief type of assistance, or the UK Government's Homeowners Mortgage Support Scheme. If assistance from these other schemes doesn't remove the threat of repossession, then we will of course accept applications, and as I said, the advisor can tailor the covering letter to explain that. We take the view, and the Scottish Government takes the view, that we always have been and we will retain the status, if you like, of being the scheme of last resort, and by doing so it simply means that the Scottish Government's money goes that bit further. There are new maximum eligibility prices that have been set, but these better reflect local market prices and values, and are specifically targeted to house size by apartment. The thresholds that are published and are there for eligibility are on the government's website, but these are based on the lowest 25% of properties in that particular area. The values exclude discounted right to buy sales, but they're based on recent house sales. That's a conscious decision because we're specifically targeting people who are at the lower end of the housing market, because potentially these people have less ability to be able to trade down and buy somewhere either cheaper or smaller, suitable for their needs. So that's specifically why we're targeting the lower end of the housing market. However, having said that, we may be able to apply some discretion if the household has a particular need to remain in that house as a result of a disability. But we will be asking for medical evidence to support that. As far as shared equity is concerned, to be eligible to be considered for mortgage to shared equity, although the owner must have at least 25% equity in their property before it's considered eligible, the government stake may be more or less than that 25%, depending on how affordable and sustainable it is for the applicant. And again, the money advisor will go through the income and expenditure with the applicant, submit proposals to the government which explains what is and what isn't affordable. We will then take a decision on how much of an equity stake we have to take to make that a viable proposition. The other additional eligibility points that are up on the screen there, I'm not going to go through them, but really these were introduced in a conscious effort to safeguard the equity stake that the Scottish Government would take in anybody's property. But they're quite important ones to be aware of from a money advisor's point of view, that before somebody can apply, they have to satisfy these additional conditions if it's shared equity they're interested in. Certainly, since the new schemes have been introduced, the role of the applicants and advisors have become more detailed. It's the government's aim to streamline the administration process when we're dealing with applications. Hopefully, this will reduce the time that was previously spent on information gathering when an application form was received, because applicants themselves should be in possession of the information that we are needing. So we want that to come in with the application, rather than simply accept an application and then have to start doing chasing up for evidence. But whilst we're processing it, more importantly, we're conscious that we want to speed up the process. So by getting information in earlier, we hopefully will reduce the amount of debt that's accruing whilst our application is being processed. You may be familiar, if you're a money advisor, with our forms and our leaflets. This is the information leaflet, and that's the application form. And what I always say to money advisors is, page 26 of the application form can be used as a checklist if you are submitting an application on somebody's behalf. That will tell you the information that you need to send in to accompany it. If a trustee has been appointed to manage somebody's estate, then the 3 months in arrears requirement can be discarded, because obviously if a trustee is forcing the sale of the property, then that's what then makes puts that home at risk, and discussions won't be taking place with the lender and the applicant. So the trustee can force the sale, which really alleviates the 3 months in arrears criteria. Depending on the circumstances, and I think this is important for money advisors, a standard letter will generally be enough for a majority of applications, but because they are all different, I think, bear in mind, you will have to tweak them to suit the particular aspects of that particular case and that particular application. In 2009 there was a review of the new scheme, which the government had said it would carry out after 6 months, and it looked at the following aspects. Information advice, the participation of landlords across Scotland, the eligibility criteria, including the threshold prices, and also the administrative procedures that are there. It was carried out by an independent consulting firm. The outcomes and the recommendations were submitted to ministers in December 2009, and we've started to implement some of those recommendations and agreement by the minister. In addition to that, we're hoping to do more awareness raising sessions, and I certainly hope to piggyback on the back of the awareness raising sessions that are being rolled out later on in the summer that deal with the Homeowner and Debt Protection Act, because it's the same group of people that will be dealing with that will probably be dealing with applications to the Homeowner Support Fund. Some specific actions that we're taking, or we have taken since the evaluation. We're making some tweaks really to hopefully speed up the process, because there's a recognition that whilst we're taking applications earlier, we don't want them continuing beyond an unreasonable timescale. So we're trying to reduce the amount of administrative time that is spent. We're approaching landlords much earlier in the process than we originally were. It was envisaged that people would sort out their shortfall situation, then would go in and approach a landlord. we've quite quickly recognised that doesn't work, and it's not as quick a process as we would like, so we will go to the landlord much earlier than we did before. And whilst we're doing that, we're giving landlords a much shorter period to respond to our initial approaches. We're giving them 48 hours to say whether or not they're interested in a property, and then we're giving them 14 days in which to carry out their gas and electricity checks and their pre-tenancy stuff. That's an ambitious target, but I think it's an important target that we'll try and keep landlords to, but bearing in mind we can't compel landlords to adhere to them. We can only try and work with landlords as best we can. We're being more vigilant with applicants as well, and the timescales that we're allowing them to respond, particularly where there are shortfalls, because very often people will get letters about shortfalls and either ignore them or do very little about them, and it's in their interest really to get things moving as quick as we can. So we're going to give them shorter timescales. We're going to be copying in the advisors to the letters we're sending out so that everybody's aware of what stage the application is at, in order to try and speed things up and help the applicant in any discussions that they will have with their lender. We are making changes to reflect this in our administrative procedures, which are published on the government's website. The new updated ones are there. We are also updating our application form and information leaflet, and we should hope to have that available by next week. Thereafter, again, that will be on the Scottish Government's website. But it's really just to make things clearer for the process, particularly in shared equity cases, which were a new beast, if you like, for the Scottish Government. We've realised through the first few that we've processed that there's different information that we require. The letters that we send out have to be clearer, so we've changed them to reflect that. So hopefully that will filter through, and advisors will see the benefit of that. Also, to cope with the increasing demand and the new changes, we've updated our IT system, and again that's been a process that we've been working on throughout the period since the scheme was introduced, and on the back of the recommendations in the evaluation. Some very quick or brief statistics up in the scheme there. Since 2003, the government has processed more than 2,500 applications for mortgage to rent, stroke mortgage to shared equity. More than 1,100 successfully settled. That's households, that's not people, and so you can multiply that by whichever number you like. But that's the amount of people who have been able to remain in their home through the mortgage to rent or shared equity schemes. A number haven't proceeded for a number of different reasons. Mainly at the start of the schemes in 2003, because there was a requirement for legal action to be underway, people had applied too early in the process and were considered to be ineligible because there was no legal action. So that's why that figure is pretty high. Even with the government schemes in place at that particular time as well, we simply can't. We don't have the powers to stop a lender from evicting people. We can only work on the goodwill and the cooperation of lenders. And in some cases, evictions were carried out whilst the application process was ongoing. And in cases, sometimes the property value is too high, which means they're ineligible. Under the old rules and under the new rules, that has always been the case. And in some cases, we simply can't get a landlord who's willing to buy a particular property. Despite having coverage across the whole of Scotland, landlords will make a decision on a case-by-case basis, and it's entirely their decision whether or not they want the property. The applications that were withdrawn, sometimes people did come to an arrangement with their lender and were able to withdraw their application voluntarily, that they no longer needed it, and the threat of repossession was removed. Sometime, probably in the earlier stages of the 2003, 4, 5, whilst they were applying to the government, their property was up for sale and they were able to sell it in the open market. Probably not so easy to do that nowadays, but certainly that was a reason in the past why applications were withdrawn. And we're processing around 450 applications live at the moment. That's just to give you a scale on the number that we're doing. Demand has been increasing certainly over the last 2 years. 48% about a year and a half ago, 22% in this current year. The demand has gone up, but last year through the scheme, 303, which was a record number of successful applications, were settled in 2009, 2010. as Graham has already said, this presentation will be on the shelter website, the Scottish Government web address for the scheme, the administrative procedures, the forms, anything you need to know will be there as well, and that's our telephone helpline. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much.